Hey, warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you, as we've got another conference preview podcast. This is the Big South, obviously a conference that rose to prominence last year with High Point not being a low point. They won a game in the NCAA tournament, so we'll be diving in on the trends and what we all saw on the betting front from this conference in segment number 1. In the second segment, we've seen some movement here in the conference. We've got a lot of players that enter in the transfer portal from this conference and a lot of signings from some of these teams with a lot of NIL resources, and we'll be talking about that with our good friend Rob Donaldson. He does such amazing work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets, so we're going to take a look at all 9 of these teams with him in the second segment, and then in the final segment, I'm going to give you guys my projector or finish for the Big South. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I do beg with you. I do plead with you. Please do send in those Twitter/X questions. And when it comes to these conference previews, I do stray away from answering those questions with regards to these podcasts. I want them to be evergreen. So whether you're listening to a conference preview podcast in June, July, August, September, October, you're getting great information to get you set for the upcoming college basketball season. So let's get down to business and let's take a look at a conference in the Big South that had quite a few teams that were bumping up the tempo. And the team that was playing at the fastest pace, that would be Charleston Southern. How about 4th in the country in terms of total possessions per game? But you had a few teams that were very much nipping at their heels. Radford, they were 11th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. High Point really sped themselves up. They had the coaching change that occurred as they lose Alan Hussein. They instead go up to 45th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. There's one team that clearly is trying to be the black sheep out of all these teams in the conference. That'd be Presbyterian, 273rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And Asheville really slowed themselves down from past years as well. Very unlike them, 235th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. For USC Upstate, they were more around about 90th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And Gardner-Webb, they were just a mess. 92nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game, a bottom 20 team in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis. Absolutely destroyed on the glass. Not great there. And Winthrop is always a team that likes to play up tempo, 27th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And then Longwood, they were a team that was a little bit more up tempo than in the past, 65th in terms of total possessions per game. So you had a lot of teams that were gunning it out there, and you did have some spotty three-point shooting. That's why you did have a lot of the teams in the conference be well outside the top 200 in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis. Longwood, 214th in the country with that regard. USC Upstate, 318th in the country in terms of points per possession. Winthrop was a solid offense. They were 94th in the country in terms of points per possession, but even a team in UNC Asheville that typically is really good on offense, they were 230th in the country in terms of points per possession. We laid it out with Gardner-Webb. Nice, hearty 360th. Not great there. Charleston Southern was an interesting team as well. They were about 204th in terms of points per possession. We'll dive in on them in a second. And for High Point, they were obviously the high point in this conference. They were 12th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And then getting to that three-point shooting, High Point was a team that was able to do a pretty solid job from distance. They were shooting about 34.2%. That's about 161st in the country. And Radford was a team that had a little bit of three-point shooting as well. They were more around about 199th. They shot 33.5% from three-point range. Again, Gardner-Webb, 320th in the country. They shot a nice hearty 31% from three. USC Upstate, though, they were 308th in the country. They shot 31.4%. Longwood was 310th. They also shot 31.4% from three-point range. So you did have a lot of struggles with these teams from the outside. Winthrop was a team that was really built on the inside. So even though they were top 100 team in terms of points per possession, still only about 215th. They shot from three-point range right around about 33.3%. Presbyterian is another one of those teams that left a lot to be desired from the outside. 302nd in terms of three-point shooting percentage. And what I thought was really the difference between the haves and the have-nots in the conference, being able to generate turnovers, because either you did a great job of it or you had nothing whatsoever. Presbyterian, about 236th in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Wasn't too bad for this conference. High Point, they were obviously your top team. How about being 7th in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis? Longwood was another team I was very solid with this regard. How about 28th in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis? And then you got Gardner-Webb. Again, they were rough, 263rd in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. And then Charleston Southern, they just put no pressure on you whatsoever. That's why they went down the toilet bowl in conference play, 362nd in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Really good with their 2-point and 3-point shooting defense, but yeah, they were not generating a lot of turnovers. UNC Asheville, they had a little bit of a fall off, 250th in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Radford was a team that bumped up the tempo a little bit, 81st in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. And then you've got Winthrop, who's more middle of the road, 178th in the country with that regard. And you take a look at how that reflects with regards to betting trends, because you don't have like super duper inclement travel or anything like that. You've got a lot of teams out there in the Carolinas, teams out there down south, as they like to call it. And with the Big South, you had some pretty profitable teams, and you had some teams that were just an absolute turd. The team that was an absolute turd was actually Winthrop. How about 12-19 against the spread? As far as awful as Gardner-Webb was, they were just so badly valued after they lost to I believe that was Southern Greenville or something like that. It was non-Division I, Greenville College, something like that. They get destroyed on their home floor by a Division II school. After that, 15-14-1 against the spread. And you had a lot of sort of even-Steven teams. Outside of Winthrop, you had a pair of teams in Longwood and USC Upstate, 13-16 against the spread. Charleston Southern and Radford were 14-15 against the spread. And then UNC Asheville, Gardner-Webb either went 15-14 or 15-14-1 against the spread. High Point, 17-15-1 against the spread. Presbyterian, 17-13 against the spread. So nothing that was like really earth-shattering to the positive or the negative there. And you take a look at how these teams performed at home. Even though the travel wasn't like super duper rambunctious or anything like that, there was a clear advantage. Gardner-Webb was 6-3-1 against the spread at home. Presbyterian 7-4 against the spread at home. Longwood 7-5 against the spread at home. Charleston Southern 6-5 against the spread at home. High Point 8-7 against the spread at home. And then you did have Radford at 6-8 against the spread at home. UNC Asheville 5-7 at home, and then Winthrop 4-7 against the spread at home. But all in all, that boded well for a lot of these teams. And you had obviously your very, very clear, demonstratively good team in High Point in the conference. But how about the way that these teams performed as an underdog? Every single team in this conference covered at least 50% of their games as an underdog. High Point a stellar 2-0 against the spread as an underdog. You had Winthrop go 5-2. 10-6 for both Charleston Southern and UNC Asheville against the spread as an underdog. Radford 7-5, Presbyterian 12-10, 8-7 for Longwood, 15-14-1 for Gardner-Webb. They were an underdog in every one of their games. And then USC Upstate brought up the rear. They were 9-9 against the spread as a favorite end. They were 9-9 against the spread as a underdog end. Lone team that was profitable against the spread as a favorite was Presbyterian, actually. 5-2 against the spread as a favorite. High Point, nothing great, nothing awful. 15-1 against the spread. But Winthrop was 7-17 against the spread as a favorite. Charleston Southern 4-8 against the spread as a favorite. Longwood 5-9 against the spread as a favorite. So lots and lots of struggles there. And I talk about perhaps some overreactions to what we saw in non-conference play and conference play. Gardner-Webb, who was just so terrible last year, that's not even funny. They found value because they were so badly undervalued. 12-5-1 against the spread in conference play. Longwood was 11-6 against the spread in conference play. Presbyterian 11-7. So these teams that got off to shaky starts, Radford 10-7 against the spread in conference play, they really cashed for you. Meanwhile, High Point was only 9-1 against the spread in conference play. Charleston Southern went down the toilet bowl at 6-11 against the spread in conference play. Winthrop 5-14 against the spread in conference play. And then you do take a look at the totals because we saw a lot of teams that were high-flying and playing up tempo. The lone team that played more unders than overs was USC Upstate last year. 15 unders, 14 overs. Your top over team was High Point because they were just so good on offense. 22-11 to the over. You had 19 overs, 10 unders for Charleston Southern, 17 overs, 12 unders for Longwood, 16 overs, 13 unders for Radford. You had Gardner-Webb, Presbyterian, both have 16 overs, 14 unders. UNC Asheville, 15 overs, 14 unders. Winthrop, 16 overs, 15 unders. So you really saw that take hold. And if you're looking at conference play and conference play only, you did see things just really start to crank up even more because things were a little bit more 50-50 with regards to the overs and unders in non-conference play. But in conference play, these teams just really wanted to run. Only Gardner-Webb had more unders than overs at 8 overs to 10 unders, mainly because they just couldn't put the ball in the basket. But Charleston Southern, 13 overs to 4 unders in conference play. Presbyterian, 12 overs, 6 unders. High Point, 12 overs, 7 unders. UNC Asheville, 11 overs, 7 unders. Longwood, 10 overs, 7 unders, and then 9 overs and 8 unders for both Redford and USC Upstate. Winthrop, 10 overs, 9 unders. So lots of overs, lots of tempo, and a lot of overreaction to what we saw in non-conference play. That's what we saw with regards to Big South in terms of style of play and just the trends that we saw with them. And coming next, how about if we do chat it up with one of our good friends, Rob Donaldson, and dive in on all these rosters right here on Coast to Coast Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast, the Big South Conference Preview Edition. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is the Big South Conference Preview Edition, so we head out to the guest line for a man that does a great job of looking at all forms of college basketball. He does a great job in terms of being able to break down all 365, now 366 of these teams. That'd be our good friend Rob Donaldson. He's doing such great work over at Underdog Fantasy and so much more. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. It's always a great time, especially when we're talking about conferences like the Big South that I think, obviously, from a national appeal standpoint, the national appeal isn't there, but there are bets to be won. There are some teams to watch, and there's really some fun basketball in this conference year in and year out. And so, yeah, it's nice to kind of shine some light on conferences like this.
I am right there with you. And how about if we shine a light on low-key one of the worst teams in all of college basketball last year? It'll get better as this goes along, but Gardner-Webb was a wet match in a dark cave last year. Bottom 20 team in terms of rebound percentage, bottom 20 team in terms of points scored, points allowed on a per possession basis. They actually do have a little bit of roster retention. Jacob Hudson, who was averaging darn near 10 points per game, he's back. I just love the name Ace Tolbert. He was in the backcourt last year. He's back, but I don't know about you, but it just feels like the Jeremy Luther coaching hire was not a good one. They stuck with him in the offseason, and I think as long as Luther's the coach here over at Gardner-Webb, this is going to be a team that's doomed to be at the bottom of the Big South.
Yeah, this is one of those teams that last year when you were watching them, they were almost unprecedentedly terrible to a point where you're like, this was like, if you're flagging a team as like potentially on the betting scandal list, this is the team, right? I mean,
they did that with Mississippi Valley State too, where they flagged them for the betting scandal, but they removed them because they just realized, Mississippi Valley State is just that bad. They weren't trying to tank games. We just thought that they were going to. They just suck. Never mind.
Right. I can't remember which game. It was very early on. You know what? I think it was actually going up against High Point last year. And obviously High Point, very notable team, went to the round of 32 in the NCAA tournament. But I remember they lost something like 50-110. And that was an eye-opener of, okay, yeah, not only are there levels to the mid-major and low-major ranks, there are like multitudes of levels in the same conference. And yeah, I just don't think that you can come back from a season like that and sustain any level of success. So I'm glad we're leading off with Gardner-Webb because I'm putting them right at the bottom again next season.
Yeah, until further notice, it's hard to see a lot of positivity there. How about if we look at a team that was more towards the bottom last season, though, that I actually do think that there's positivity here, and that'd be Presbyterian. Presbyterian is actually returning about 2/3 of their minutes from a season ago. They've got a guy by the name of Jalen Peterson down low, so I'm already a fan of that. It's a team that's really really zagging while other teams zig as well. You've got a lot of up-tempo teams in this conference. Presbyterian, a team that was outside the top 260 in terms of total possessions per game, have a guy in Eric Taylor who was banged up last season, was solid 2 years ago. Certainly they've got a few, shall we say, outside issues with regards to guarding the three-point line and making it from three, but I really think that there's some upside here with Presbyterian.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of kind of the Presbyterian trend that we've been seeing over the last 3 years because they've honestly been a very competent team, even though, 15 and 18 is not something that if you're in the Big Ten or if you're in the ACC, if you're one of these more notable leagues, that's not going to, get it. That's not up to snuff. But what you got to kind of factor in with overall records with a team like a Presbyterian is a lot of bye games early in non-conference play, as well as just ultimate bottom of the barrel resources to attract and acquire talent and even to retain talent. And so that also operates on the coaching front as well. So I think when you're looking at where this tenure started, in terms of, Quentin Farrell, he's been there now for, I believe it's 6 or 7 years. This might be year 7 or 8 even at this point. But when we're looking at kind of the last 3 years in the vacuum, 14 wins, 15 wins. That's above the standard for a team and a program like Presbyterian, especially in the NIL era. So I have to give it up to them. To your point, they might not be a team that ever wins this league, but they're not going to be a team that just kind of goes out crying and pouting in the corner. They're going to give these teams a game within this conference. And I think that's something you just got to note and kind of pencil in every single year.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I think that there's great upside with them, as we do have Rob Donaldson, does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And for UNC Asheville, it's another one of those programs where you know that they're never going to truly bottom out. I was expecting perhaps a little bit more from them last season. It felt like the guard play was relatively down, but I know that Mike Morrell has turned down a lot of big-time coaching jobs. This was his first time sub 500 in like 7 or 8 years last year since that COVID 2019-2020 season. And want to get your thoughts here because they do lose a lot of those guys like Toya Solomon and company from a season ago, but they retain some of the ancillary pieces. They bring in someone like a Kyrie Dunn from Georgia Southern, and this is a program where I don't know if they get back to like the top 2, top 3 of the conference, but I just have so much faith that they're never going to truly bottom out because I think that Coach Morrell is going to make sure that they're always fighting, and I did like the pickup of Mitchell Taylor in the offseason as well.
Yeah, and honestly, what I can kind of point to, and we talk about this every single time we're doing one of these conference previews, Greg, at least I kind of highlight it as something that I make it of note. But with a guy like a Mike Morrell, who came in literally in the 2018-2019 season, I mean, there have been so many changes to the sport since then, right? That was still the age for one kind of glimpse of a year where continuity mattered in the sport. You could retain guys from a freshman to senior year and do it in kind of relatively easy fashion. Well, obviously, post-COVID, the NIL landscape has changed, the transfer portal has changed, and unfortunately for coaches like this that have kind of found themselves in a spot where they're not loaded up with resources, they're not loaded up with kind of that grand national stage appeal, and they're going through all of these different incremental changes. Feels like every single year the landscape to acquire talent and to build a team kind of gets overhauled. Well, Mike Morrell is another one of those coaches that's kind of found himself in this entire tenure in a nonstop roller coaster wave of different changes in the sport. And so, I think last year and really just the sustained success that he has seen at UNC Asheville over the years. I mean, they obviously have made the NCAA tournament since then. They've gone, second place in the conference 2 consecutive seasons prior to last season where they did go 15-17 overall, 8-8 in conference. I tend to think that is a model of, to your point, consistency that you can kind of buy into because despite all the roller coaster effects, despite all the crazy roster turnover, despite everything going on in the sport, he has stayed a constant winner. So yeah, sign me up for UNC Asheville to be near the top. And when it comes down to the conference play, when you're talking about individual games, that's a guy that I want to get in the foxhole with on those important games when they are taking on the cream of the crop in the conference.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And this is going to sound a little bit blasphemous here, but I'm feeling a little bit down about this team coming into the season, and that would be Winthrop, because for Winthrop, they were a great team last year. They were a top 100 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and I felt like they finally got that missing ingredient last season, because for Winthrop, it always felt like they had a lot of turnover issues, what have you, and I felt like Mark Prosser was really able to get over the hump because he did a nice job spotting a point guard, Kareem Rozier, who was able to do a nice job doling out good, clean offense. He's gone. Logan Duncombe is gone. You have so many of those guys that were rock solid from a season ago. Now they do have Sadifa Hendaway, who's going to be coming back, but they really didn't load up too much in the transfer portal, losing a big man like a Duncombe, who was one of the best in all, I would say, mid-major college basketball. If you take a look at what he was able to do for this team, I feel like this could be a little bit of a down year here for Winthrop.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because obviously Winthrop just has a phenomenal coaching tree, right? When you think about Greg Marshall, when you think about Pat Kelsey, and now, they pass the torch over to Mark Prosser. I mean, that's a great lineage to come out of the Big South Conference at any program, or even just the conference as a whole. If that's your lineage of coaches you passed along, you're feeling pretty good about your conference's ability to attract coaching. But yeah, no, to your point, I thought they really, really had a great opportunity last season to make some serious waves, because when you look at that Winthrop team early on, when they were going toe-to-toe early with Arkansas, I mean, they should have won in Fayetteville, but it came honestly down to some questionable refereeing calls that I think honestly stole that game from them winning outright at Arkansas. And they also had a chance to beat George Mason last year, who had a great season. They beat Queens to open up the year in that NCAA tournament team. They went toe-to-toe with Nebraska, who had their best season of all time going to the Sweet 16. I mean, this was a team that was loaded with talent. It showed early on. And then for whatever reason, for the second straight year, they got absolutely creamed in the Big South Tournament Championship because High Point exists. They're a very talented team. They're loaded with talent. But it felt like last year's team was the stars aligning for Winthrop to really make some waves. It didn't happen. And so now, almost inherently, after you come off of a team with, to your point, Kareem Rozier, Duncombe, all the guys that they had kind of making up last year's roster that are no longer there, it almost inherently feels like they're going to take a step back. And when you do have a couple teams in the conference that are spending dollars in the new NIL transfer portal heavy era, I just don't think that Winthrop is going to get back there. I like to get proven wrong. I think Mark Prosser's a really good guy, really good coach. But yeah, to your point, this is not a team that I'm going to be kind of taking as my future to end up winning this league.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And it's not like I think that they're going to be down there with Gardner Webb or anything like that. They are much better than that. But I just don't think that this is going to be the Winthrop that we all know and love. But we do have the man that we all know and love, Rob Donaldson, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Soups. And I feel like a wild card in this conference could be USC Upstate. They lose quite a bit from a season ago, but Marty Richter, it feels like, has done more with less. They had a nice road win against Fresno State last season. They are retaining one of those guys from a season ago, Lyric Davis, a former top 300 recruit. He was averaging like 8.5 points, 4.5 boards. Good versatility there. They're gambling on Zachary Johnson, who was glued to the bench over at Central Florida last season, but they were a top 80 team in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. They did the gritty things. They got their nose dirty. Jaquarius Patterson, coming on over from the junior college ranks of Navarro College, is a guy that I think has some upside. And for Upstate, I don't think that they're going to be competing with High Point or anything like that, but at the very least, they're putting out there something respectable.
100%. And I think, we talk about this every single year, Greg, at certain points where we're talking about year 3 head coaches. Well, this is a guy going into year 3 at the same program, USC Upstate. And he's also a disciple of a coaching tree that I think is very, very underrated, and it being one, the program of basketball for Drake, and also Darian DeVries. And I think when you're looking at, again, the trend line, 6 wins in year 1, 6-26, bottom of the barrel. Last year, 13-19. They doubled their win output. And when you look at teams that have doubled their win output in just kind of that 3-year stretch like that, it takes you to teams like Idaho. We just talked about it in terms of, the Big Sky Conference and them making the NCAA tournament last year. You look at also like a team like a Portland State in that same league. You look at Cal Baptist. You look at some of these upstart young programs that are kind of being led under the tutelage of those year 3, year 4, year 5 guys that all of a sudden really kind of jump onto the scene because everything kind of culminates and builds to that point. Well, I kind of feel like USC Upstate, if you're looking for a sneaky great team to back early on, that's on nobody's radar, that could really outperform expectations, whether it's against the spread or on the flat out money line in some spots. I really do tend to think that it's going to be this USC Upstate team with Marty Richter. I'm going to be backing them early, and we'll see how it goes.
And I feel like this team might be the biggest wild card out there because for Radford, out of their minutes last season, I believe that they lose 99.9% of them. Zach Chu comes over from the NBA ranks, and for Radford, it was, in my opinion, topsy-turvy last year. They certainly cranked up the tempo, 11th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. They're looking to someone like a Ja'Cory Robinson, who comes over from Alcibi to help them out. Jordan Key, he was at Miami, but really didn't see any minutes. They bring in Tristan Gross, so they've got players in the roster. And for Zachary Chu, I think that he proved that he's not an awful coach, but how good of a coach he's going to be is a little bit TBD. And I feel like going from year number 1 to year number 2 and having no retention whatsoever is almost like starting from square one once again for Radford as well.
Yeah, and honestly, I think Radford and a lot of just the basketball betting public, or even just the people that kind of know this league inherently, almost kind of overrated the impact or the plug and play ability of Radford University. They just kind of felt like, hey, we can throw dollars at the player personnel and everything's going to be right in the world when we turn over to, from the Darius Nichols area to the era to the Zachary Chu era, because even Mike Jones prior to that had a really great tenure. Well, obviously, the year one, that did not end up being the case. Ultimately, they finished 500, but they felt a lot worse than 500 last year, because in spots where they had a chance to really play up, they just fell flat and just didn't. So I kind of look at next year's year in terms of Zachary Chu and this era, and also just the trajectory of the program as kind of a really magnifying important year, because if there's not definitive growth, does a team like a Radford that's throwing kind of the most resources out there in the conference outside of High Point make a move almost kind of prematurely? I could absolutely see that being the case, because despite all the hype of, hey, the new NIL era, we can kind of build up these programs. We can do what we want. We're seeing what's happening with High Point. You got to turn over results to justify, those boosters and those donors continuing to do so. So I'm very interested to see how this next year goes for Radford. And ultimately, to your point, they are a major wild card as it stands today.
Yep, it certainly is. And if Zach Chu is a great coach, we could see Radford as like a top 3, top 4 team. And boy, this might toilet bowl as well. So it's going to be a lot of good, clean family fun to look at them. And then when it comes to this team, they don't necessarily do a lot flashy. This is not the sexiest team in the conference, but I actually like this Longwood team. They were absolutely awful in terms of flowing good, clean offense, outside the top 300 in terms of three-point shooting percentage, turnovers on a per-possession basis on offense, but generated a lot of turnovers on defense. I love the way that they attacked the transfer portal, bringing in MJ Williams, who had a nice freshman year at Eastern Kentucky. TJ Robinson, he was a solid player over at St. Peter's, a team that very much prioritizes defense. Jalen Bernard, he's back from last season, and I look at this Longwood team, and I don't know if they quite are the biggest competition to High Point, but if it's not them, I don't think that it's too far off in terms of where they might be, in terms of perhaps being second or third in the conference, because I like their attention, and I think that Longwood just does such a great job on the defensive side of things.
And a lot of people tend to forget when these types of things happen in the coaching world or in the basketball world. It almost kind of gets shrugged off as, oh, how much does a good head coach or a good kind of program developer really matter in the grand scheme of things if you have enough talent? Well, obviously last year, Ronnie Thomas got kind of thrown into the fire because Griff Aldrich just decided, you know what? I'm basically going to pull an Alan Huss, and instead of going to Creighton and becoming the heir apparent there, I'm just going to go to Virginia for a season. And hey, it was a phenomenal year at Virginia. Obviously, he was never going to be the heir apparent, just because Ryan Odom was brand new there, a young head coach, no kind of plans to retire. But obviously, Griff Aldrich is on to different things. He moved on to Pepperdine. We'll see what turns out there. But losing a really established, great head coach like that, and kind of the last second spur of the moment part of the offseason, is significant. And it did show early on for Longwood where they were struggling to kind of get their feet under them. So what happens when Ronnie Thomas in year 2 now kind of has this full season? And last year, at the end of the year, they were playing really respectable basketball. So I tend to think, to your point, the trend line here could be all over the place. It could be an absolute plummet. But I tend to think in the more optimistical sense with this team, that's going to be a really positive season for Longwood basketball, because they are one of the teams within the conference that does dump a little bit into the resource bucket. They also attract some players. They have a good standing within the league there too, just from a hierarchy standpoint. And so, yeah, we'll see what happens, but I'm a big believer in the Longwood Lancers early on.
Yep, I am as well, and I think that this team is very interesting because they brought in one of their own a few seasons ago, Saw Nimbley. He took over for Barclay Radabon. For Charleston Southern, they got off to a nice start last season, really toilet bowl towards back half of the season. They don't allow you good looks. They were 50th in opponents' three-point shooting percentage last year, 20th in opponents' two-point shooting percentage. Bottom 5 team in terms of generating turnovers. They just lose so many of those guys, though, that were good scorers for them, like a Bryson Blaine, who was able to give you like 17 to 18 points per game. He was great for them last season. He's now going to be out of the fold. You've got so much of that backcourt that is going to be gone, and I really question where Charleston Southern is going to be, because they have just been stuck below 500 in this conference for so long, and if they weren't able to do it last year with Alan Sumler and company, I just question what this year is going to bring.
Yeah, and I'll kind of use some perspective in terms of Charleston Southern, because you look back to 2018, 2019, and just even the 10-year prior to Saw Nimbley. This was a team that was winning 3 games a year, 6 games a year. They were well below. They were the basement, in college basketball. They were aligning the Mississippi Valley states, the South Carolina states of the world, the Delaware states, really the teams that live at the bottom. They were there, and so I do tend to think that when you're looking at, again, that 3-year trend line, and we talk about this every single year, Greg, year 2, year 3, year 4 head coaches, what does that look like for the trajectory? And to your point, a lot of roster turnover. We'll see if that potentially dampens the trend, but they went from 8 wins first year, 10 wins the second year, 15 wins last season. And you and I both know they were a lot more competitive against the spread as well in a lot of those games there too. They had some really great performances against the top teams in the conference that normally Charleston Southern's going out there looking like Gardner Webb. So I tend to think that in year 4 here, there is some cause for optimism. At the same time, to your point, the roster turnover at a school like this, inherently, that kind of leads to a lot of wild cardness, because who knows if those players are, 1, talented, or 2, even gel together. So it's going to be kind of a wait and see through the first month to see if they are legit. But if they show some early signs of being competitive and playing good basketball, that's going to be one of those teams I really kind of key in on as a good buy low once they actually get into league play.
Yep, I do agree with you there. I do think that we need to see what they do a little bit more moving forward, and they got to be better than the bottom 5 in terms of generating turnovers. But if they can shore that up a little bit more, I think that there's upside there. And we've got one team left to break down, and if you want to go against High Point winning the conference, you be my guest. But I think that they are very clearly the top team here in the conference. They actually win a game in the NCAA tournament, completely unheard of for the Big South. They're bringing in Jason Rivera-Torres, who had 16 points per game over at Monmouth, absolute stat sheet stuffer, began his career over at Vanderbilt. Franquan Sherman from Kennesaw State, go Owls. Conrad Martinez is back. Isaac Garrett, 14.7 boards from Oakland is in there. CJ Brown, a starter from South Florida, he comes into the fold as well. If you want to, Liam Campbell, 52% three-point shooter over at St. Mary's. This is just a difference between the have versus the have-nots. And if you have anything to say that leads me to not believe that High Point is a have, you let me know, because by default, I've got them number 1.
I'm right there with you. This is a no-brainer. And this is Gonzaga of the Big South at this point, right? Which is crazy, because I'll say this. You don't have to go back into the depths of history to find bad High Point teams, right? Or even just mediocre High Point teams. It's within the decade.
I don't know who has money, but they are certainly putting it into this program.
Oh, yeah. This program is funded out the wazoo. They are a poster child of, hey, this era is different. If you want to build a program up from literal scratch and make them go out and compete for a literal Sweet 16 within a 3-year span, just do it. You can. And so I love, obviously, what Flynn Clayman has done in the early goings. He didn't get the best set of, circumstances in terms of a smooth transition. Alan Huss, left a kind of a last second thing to go to Creighton. That was a big thing a few years ago. So, hey, he's done a really good job of getting those talented players to stay in-house, to, attract players to this university. It's not hard when you're throwing a lot of money, but you still got to get those personalities and those dollars to gel on the floor. And he absolutely has. So, yeah, to your point, not much else you have to say. This is going to be the best team in the conference, bar none. And they're going to be, again, one of the teams that if they do make it in the tournament, which I expect them to do, they're going to be a team that can put up damage regardless of what personnel is actually out on that floor.
Absolutely. I think you would have to be banned from this podcast if you put Gardner Webb in front of High Point at this point. But that's unfortunately you did not, because Rob, you are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to college basketball. You do such an amazing job day in and day out looking at this incredible sport. This time of year, you're doing a great job on the baseball front and so much more. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, it's always a blast talking ball with you, my man. And for those who are wanting to follow my Major League Baseball bets, my college basketball bets once they come back in the season, Twitter/X at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
It's always great to be able to get Rob aboard. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the Big South. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Rob Donaldson. He's such a wealth of knowledge. He does an amazing job looking at all these mid-major conferences, all 12 months out of the year. He does an incredible job looking at this great sport of college basketball, and every single time he joins me, lends such great insight. So a big thanks to Rob for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the Big South, and as per usual, since I am doing a conference preview today, if we did see any news and notes in college basketball on Tuesday, I will just sum those up on the podcast tomorrow, because I do want to be keeping these conference preview podcasts as evergreen as possible. Whether you're listening in June, July, August, September, October, you want to be getting good information for the start of the college basketball season. So these are standalone podcasts. I don't really have anything intersecting with them. I want to give as much sparkle and shine to the Big South as humanly possible. So how about if we get things started, and in my projector or finish at dead last, it should come as a shock to absolutely nobody, Gardner Webb. Now, they do return Jacob Hudson from last year. He was averaging 10.5 points, right around about 4 boards, 1.4 steals per game. So they aren't completely bereft of talent. Ace Tolbert, he was able to put in there 6.9 points, 1.2 steals per contest, but this team was in the bottom 15 in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis. Again, do I think that they're going to be a little bit better than they were a season ago? Yes. You're bringing Mikhail Pocknet, hopefully I got that correct, about 4 points, 4 rebounds per game over at Buffalo last year. Jackson Skipper, he was stuck on Vermont's bench last year, but at 6'7", career 35% three-point shooter. But I'm really not a believer in Jeremy Luther as a coach. They lost at home to North Greenville, a Division II team last season. They really don't have a lot down low. They really don't have a lot of three-point shooting. Ace Tolbert, he's going to probably be able to do an okay job of giving you a little bit of facilitation, but really not much of a facilitator. They're just not keeping up with the Joneses in this conference. Dead last in my projector or finish, it is Gardner Webb, and then at number 8, it's Charleston Southern. Charleston Southern was actually 20th in opponents' 2-point shooting percentage and 50th in opponents' 3-point shooting percentage last year, but a bottom 5 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Now, I do think that they're going to be a little bit better down low. Davion Bradford was limited to 19 games due to injury. Last we saw him at Siena in a full season 2 years ago, 4.7 points, 1.2 blocks per contest. They do have Deontay Bass, who comes over from Alabama State, about 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game as a 6'6", a little bit of a combo player. I believe he began his career over at Georgetown as well, but you lose so many of those explosive scores from season ago that did give Charleston Southern a little bit of, shall we say, pop. And for Charleston Southern, this was a team that just absolutely gunned it last year. They were a top 5 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and you saw with that defense, they were a really strong team early. They faded late down the stretch. Now you have to replace Bryson Blaine, who had 17 points per game, Alan Sumler, who was able to supply the team with about 19 points per contest, and you really don't return a lot from a season ago. They're going to be looking to some Division II transfers like an Anthony Ruffalo, who had 16.5 points over at Division II Cedarville last season. You got Jacob Taylor returns after averaging 5 points, shot 36% from three. And then Jackson Crawford, he was at the Division II ranks. He was a guy that put in there 15 points per game. They're rolling the dice here on Mathak Majak. Hopefully I got that correct. 7'4" big man, could not get out there on the floor for New Orleans. So just lots of unknown, and them not being able to generate any ball pressure whatsoever, I think will lead to their demise. Number 8 in my projector finish, I've got Charleston Southern. At number 7, I'm going to be going with USC Upstate. They're going to be looking at Zachary Johnson, who really didn't see a lot of playing time over at Central Florida, to be able to elevate this team. Now, I do like the Marty Richter style in general. They were able to really upgrade last season. Now, they do lose much of that backcourt from a year ago, but you bring back Lyric Davis, who was able to average 8.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. With Jeffrey Martinez out of the fold, they need to bring in a little bit of size, and they did so with 6'8" Delaware State big man Miles Webb, 9.5 points, 6 boards. That enhances a team that was 78th overall in terms of opponent's 2-point shooting percentage. They were relatively okay down low. They're going to be looking to Jacarius Patterson, another guy that comes in from the junior college level over at Navarro College, to be able to really give this team some pop. He was able to throw in there about 4.5 boards, steal per contest, so you've got some relatively good versatility there. And David Tubeck, he should be able to give you a little bit of 3-point shooting, 6'7" combo player, 33.3% 3-point shooter, 3.5 points per game over at UTEP. I think that they're going to struggle with depth, and Johnson should be able to give this team a little bit of a boost in the backcourt, but it's a little bit sight unseen because he didn't see any minutes over at Central Florida last season. So number 7 in my projector finish, I'm going with USC Upstate. At number 6, I have UNC Asheville here. They were 12th in opponent's 3-point shooting percentage away from them last season, and you've got Kelsey Phipps, who's going to need to really step up at the guard spot. He was able to shoot about 43% from 3, 5 points and a steal per contest. Relatively small volume for UNC Asheville. They do lose a lot of those guys that really made this team tick from 8 seasons ago, like Toya Solomon was a guy that really had some good versatility. He was able to pop it from 3. He was able to give the team quite a bit of rebounding. He is going to be out of the fold, so you do have some question marks as to how they're going to be able to maintain down low. You also lose a guy like a Cameron Taylor, Justin Wright. I mean, these two guys average combined about 36 points per game last season. So that's a big question mark with regards to this program. But for UNC Asheville, typically they're a good 3-point shooting team. They took a little bit of setback last season, and they're going to be looking to elevate as they've got Kyrie Dunn, who's looking to get her done, 7.5 points, shot 34.5% from 3-point range over at Georgia Southern last year. He's used to playing in an up-tempo style. Miles Mayfield, he's back after averaging about 4.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. And then they went to South Carolina State to find Mitchell Taylor, who was shooting 43% from 3-point range 2 seasons ago, 8.5 points, 2.5 assists, a little bit over a steal per contest before missing all of last season. How he comes off of that injury is going to be important. I do think that Connor Dubusky is going to be a help out as well. 4.5 points per game 2 seasons ago. Lifetime 38.7% 3-point shooter. They are really rolling the dice here on a Wyoming transfer in Abdu Magasa, who had about 3 points per game. And Sage Tolentino, he's back, and he's 7'1". Problem is, he's just never been able to find any playing time. So with UNC Asheville, I've got them number 6 in terms of my projector finish. And number 5, I'm going to be going with Radford. Zachary Chu came over from the NBA ranks last season, and they got better as the season went along. They really bumped up the tempo, 11th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and it's a new look roster. I do like the pieces that they brought in. Pabri Kambea, hopefully I got that correct. He was shooting about 34% from 3, 5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game from Marist, and this was a team as well outside the top 225 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I think that they're going to be better here. Jordan Key really didn't see any minutes last year over at Miami, but he should be able to give them a little bit of versatility at right around about 6'6". Ja'Cory Robinson, he was over at Austin P. Another good defense, 6.5 points, 3 boards, 2 assists, nice stat sheet suffer there. And then you've got Zion Walker. He missed the entire 2025-26 season. He's actually back. This was a completely different regime than where he was at Radford 2 seasons ago when he averaged 6 points on 39% 3-point shooting. You've got Cameron Jackson, who's got about 6'8" size, 4 points, 4 boards per game, but you do have a team that also was 336th in home 3-point shooting percentage at 37.6%, so a little bit of question mark there. I think Radford ends up towards the middle of the conference. I've got them in my projector finish at Mambo number 5. Number 4, we are going to be going with Winthrop. They were a solid offense last year, 94th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They have to replace darn near everything from last season, and they're looking at Micah Davis, who was a part of IU Indy last year. One of the most harebrained styles we've ever seen. 9 points a steal per contest. He's not shy to play fast. He was a 6th man for the team last year, but who's really going to be the leader for the team? George Nachalavici, hopefully I got that correct. it's a really hard name to say. He comes over from North Dakota, 6'10", 8 points, 5 rebounds as a part-time starter. Spence Sims, he was over at Gardner-Webb, 10 points per game on 43% three-point shooting. I laid out how bad Gardner-Webb was already in this podcast, and the team was 64th in terms of offensive rebound percentage. Losing a guy like a Logan Duncombe, you just don't replace someone like that. Delphine Headway, he was averaging about 6 points, 4 rebounds per game off the bench. He should be able to help out a little bit, and then you bring in Keyshawn Fisher, the Detroit transfer, who was averaging 5.5 points per game, but I just don't think that they're going to be the same team defensively that they were a season ago. Winthrop, up until last year, they really struggled with some of the fundamentals in terms of turnovers, in terms of free throw shooting percentage, and I think that could be rearing its ugly head once again. So Winthrop I've got at number 4 in terms of my projector or finish. Number 3 is Longwood. Longwood is going to need to improve the three-point shooting. 310th in terms of overall three-point shooting percentage at 31.4%, 327th in terms of turnovers per possession on offense, but I think that Alonzo Billups is going to be able to take some strides forward on offense. Last year, 8 points, 1.5 steals per contest. They also bring in MJ Williams from Eastern Kentucky, and I think that he's going to be a stabilizer. 10 points, 3.5 boards, 4.7 assists, 1.5 steals per contest. You've got TJ Robinson, who he was able to average about 9.5 points, 2.5 assists per contest, and Williams, by the way, was a freshman over at Eastern Kentucky, so I think that he takes a year 1 to year 2 bump. They're rolling the dice a little bit on Kenny Shadea, who was over at Boston College last year. At 6'9", really didn't see a lot of playing time. Lazer Milosevich, he was over at Duquesne last year. He's a guy that's 6'10". Again, a little bit of a roll of the dice there, but you know what you're going to get out of Jalen Bedard, who was able to give you about 7.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game for this Longwood team, and then you bring back a mid-30s three-point shooter in Elijah Kelly. Longwood, one of the better teams in terms of generating turnovers last year, top 30 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. I think that defense keeps them towards the top of the conference. Still have question marks on offense, but I've got them number 3 in terms of my projector or finish. And number 2 in my projector or finish, we're going to go with the Blue Host of Presbyterian. Now, they need to improve their three-point shooting percentage. 302nd last year at 31.6%, 265th in terms of overall points per possession, but you're bringing back darn near 2/3 of your minutes from a season ago. Carl Parrish, 14.5 points, 2.5 assists, 40.5% three-point shooter last year. That's a heart and soul piece in the backcourt. Tristan Wilson, 11.5 points, 3.5 boards, 3.8 assists per contest. And then you may lose a few pieces down low because you're going to be losing Jonah Pierce, but you bring back a Peterson, and we like that on this podcast. Jalen Peterson, 11 points, 7.5 boards, a steal, 1.5 blocks per contest. Iverson King, 4.5 points off the bench last season. Eric Taylor, limited to just 6 games last year in the small sample size, 6 points, 3.5 assists, over a 40% three-point shooter. He was really good during the 2024-25 season, so I think that there's some upside there. They need to improve upon 344th in opponent's three-point shooting percentage. I think that bringing back Taylor and the fact that you've got so much of this backcourt back from a season ago, you're going to need to replace Pierce in the front court, but they return a lot of pieces. They play defense-oriented. They're the slowest team in the conference. I think that that's going to help them out here. I've got Presbyterian number 2 in terms of my projector finish, and it's hard to go against these guys at number 1. It's High Point. They were 12th in the country in terms of points per possession on offense, 37th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They've got more resources than any other team in the conference, and you're bringing in Jason Rivera-Torres, who had 16 points, 8 boards, 3 assists, 2 steals, and a block per contest last season while he was over at Monmouth. He was a guy that began his career over at San Francisco, and if I'm not mistaken, Vanderbilt as well. And they should be getting back Cameron Fletcher as well. Limited due to injury. This will be like his 15th year of college basketball, but he was able to average 13 points while he was out there on the floor. Even if you don't get him back, you've got Franquan Sherman, who comes in from Kennesaw State. Go Owls, 13.7 boards, block per contest as the main big man for a team that went to the NCAA tournament out of Conference USA. Connor Martinez is back, 9 points, 3 assists, steal per contest. Isaac Garrett, he comes in from Oakland, 13.5 points, 7 boards per contest. This team should be much better on the glass as they were a team that was outside the top 120 in terms of rebound percentage. Then you've got CJ Brown. How they landed him from South Florida is he was a big piece of that team that went to the NCAA tournament. I don't know, but 4.7 assists, 11 points per game. You've got Liam Campbell, who was a 52% three-point shooter as a sort of off-the-bench scoring dynamo for St. Mary's last year. This High Point team is just head and shoulders above everyone else. The only question is whether or not they're actually going to lose a game in conference play. They did so last year. I don't know if they do this year. Number 1 in my projector finish, High Point, and that'll wrap things up for the Big South Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. He joined me in the last segment, also does great work over at Underdog Fantasy. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you hear podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry CM, the email does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And conference preview podcasts are coming for all 32 conferences. We're through a few already. You can expect a few more here in the next few days, and we're going to chew our way through them. As I always like to say, here in the offseason, I'd like to average one every 5 or so days, and we're currently on track for that, so feeling very good there. And then with regards to the news and notes in college basketball, we're going to keep them going. Transfer portal's relatively dead, so expect great guest interviews all throughout the offseason, and I'm looking to build to make this a greatest college basketball season ever. And once we get back in season, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So I appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.